One might say the tracker should never have spoken to the Alpha King the way she did. But then, if he had listened to even one warning she sent up from the frontier that season, she would never have needed to raise her voice at all. So the whole ruin of it was his fault, if you followed the thread back to its root. And if Nissa had known that a single sealed letter could reach into her small and ordered life and tear it up whole, she might have walked out of that hall more slowly. She did not. She walked fast and did not look back. And that was the first mistake of a great many. Nissa was the second tracker of the Moon Palace, and she was not a woman who talked. She read the ground the way others read faces, trail and turn stone, and 3-day-old scent, and she trusted all of it more than her own voice, which was why the whole hall fell quiet when she began to shout. She had come in off the Fenmarch Road an hour before, still carrying the smell of the marsh and of the boy they had buried in it. Tior had been young and green, and she had promised his mother she would bring him home. Instead, she brought home word that the relief riders never came, that the low water had been left thin a whole season, while she sent message after message into silence. So, when the steward stood in the firelit hall and spoke smoothly of the crown's tireless care for the border, something in Nissa came loose and would not be put back. "We beg for riders and are sent kind words," she said, and her voice carried further than she meant. "We ask for dry powder and salt and iron for the beacon watch, and half of it never reaches the marsh. Where does it go? Gone. I have buried 3 good scouts this year, on ground the king will never walk, and I am finished calling it hard luck. It is not luck. It is a choice, made by a man in a warm tower, who cannot trouble himself to learn the names of the people who die to keep him warm." The steward went, the gray of old ash. "Old words," said a low voice from the deep frame of the window. She turned. A man leaned there, against the cold stone, with the rain running down the glass behind him, and she had not marked him when she came in. He wore a plain, gray riding cloak, the road dirt still on his boots, and he had the settled ease of a man never once made to wait in the wet on another's pleasure. Some soft court creature, she thought. "There is nothing bold about the truth," Nissa said. "Your king ought to know what is done in his name." This one could not find the low water with a map in each hand and a torch in his teeth. The man smiled, slow and unbothered, and somehow that made her angrier than anything had all night. "He is young," the stranger said, "new to the weight of it. Perhaps no one has yet told him the border is bleeding out beneath him. Then no one is doing their work, and that most of all includes him. He is the king. Not knowing is the one thing he is not allowed to be. Bold, to say such a thing where it might be carried back to him. Carry it yourself, then. Every word. I will say it louder, if it helps you remember the way." And the stranger stepped forward into the full gold light of the fire, and behind her the steward made a small strangled sound, and the benches scraped as every soul in the hall came to their feet at once. The huntmaster Merrick, who had trained her since she was a half-starved girl of 11, and had never once looked afraid of anything, was staring at the man in the gray cloak with the open white terror of someone watching a rock slide come down. And Nissa understood, a heartbeat too late and all the way to the soles of her muddy boots, whose face she had been tearing into. It was a face she knew. It was stamped on the coin she was paid with and hung in oils above the high seat she passed on every patrol. The painters had caught the dark hair and the straight nose. What none of them had caught was the rest of him, the still and watchful quiet, the pale eyes far too sharp for the easy warmth of the mouth they sat above. "Corvin," said the steward, in a whisper that carried to every corner. "His Grace." "The king." The hall went down like a field of grain under wind, every knee but hers. Merrick's hand closed hard around her arm and dragged, and she went down beside him onto the cold flags, her heart slamming once and then racing. The king did not tell her to rise. He simply looked at her, his head tilted a little, weighing her the way she might weigh a strange track in fresh snow, deciding what had made it and whether it meant her harm. "Go on," Corvin said pleasantly as though they were alone. You had a great deal more to say a moment ago. I would hate to have interrupted the best of it. Somewhere under the roar of blood in her ears, the small sensible part of Nissa told her to beg, to fold, to press her forehead to the stone, and swear it was only the grief talking. She looked up at the king of the moon palace, at the ruined boy, Tior, still fresh in the ground because of the rot she had just laid at his feet, and she found she could not make herself do it. I have said all of it already, Your Grace, she answered, and her voice did not shake, which surprised them both. There is nothing in it I would take back to save my own skin. Every scout I have put in the ground would say the same, if the dead could speak, and they cannot, so I have said it for them. A low sound moved through the kneeling hall, half a gasp and half a prayer. Merrick shut his eyes. That is a great deal of certainty, the king said. From a woman who does not know me at all. I know your border. I know it better than any living soul in this realm, and it is dying, and you were not there. For a long moment he said nothing, and she watched his face and could read nothing on it, which frightened her more than anger would have. She had spent her life reading the smallest signs. Here was a man who left none. Then Nissa did the thing that could not be undone. She reached up and unpinned the small silver moon that marked her as a tracker, sworn to the king's own service. The mark Marek had fastened there himself the day she took her oath, the only thing of worth she had ever owned. Her hands were steady. She would be glad of that later. She leaned forward and set the little moon on the cold stone in the narrow space between herself and the king, and took her hand away from it. I will not spend my life keeping watch for a crown that spends its watchers like loose coin, she said. I release myself from it. Do with me what you will. She got to her feet. No one stopped her. She turned her back on the king of the moon palace, a thing that by every law of the realm could cost her the head on her shoulders, and she walked the long silent length of the hall toward the great doors, and every step she waited for his voice at her back. She waited for the command, for the guards, for a sentence, a curse, her own name spoken in fury. She waited for him to tell her to stop, so that she could refuse, one last time, to obey. The king said nothing at all. She reached the doors, put her hands to the cold iron and pushed, and the rain and the dark came in to meet her, and still there was only silence at her back, wide and total. At the very threshold, against all her better sense, Nissa looked back. Corvin had not moved. He stood where she had left him in the gold light, with the little silver moon on the stones at his feet, watching her go, and his face was not cold, and it was not cruel, and it was not any of the things she had braced against. It was something else, something she had no name for and no time to learn, because in the next breath, he looked away into the fire, and the door of her whole life swung shut between them. She walked out into the storm. And not one soul in the Moon Palace that night could say why the Alpha King had let her go without a single word. Least of all Nissa herself, who carried the question out into the rain, like a splinter driven too deep to reach. The road down to the lower town was a river of black water, and she took it too fast in the dark. Twice she nearly went down, and some low part of her almost wished she would, because a broken ankle was a clean and honest hurt she knew what to do with, and she had no idea what to do with the thing happening in her chest. She had thrown it all away. 10 years of it, the only work she had ever been good at, the only place she had ever fit, the only name anyone had known her by. Nissa the Tracker, Nissa of the Fenmarch. There was nothing else under that name. She had been a hungry, nameless girl in a ditch when Marek found her, and he had made her into someone, and tonight she had unmade it all with her own 2 steady hands. She kept waiting to be afraid. Instead, there was only a strange, ringing hollowness, and under it, refusing to be looked at, the memory of the king's face turned toward her in the firelight, wearing an expression she could not name. By the time she reached her narrow room, the fury had burned to ash, and she sat on the edge of her cot in her wet clothes in the dark and waited. Now, for the other thing. For the king's justice. A man did not let a low-born tracker renounce her oath at his feet and forget it by morning. He would send men. Tonight or at first light. The only question was, how bad it would be. And she could not make herself care enough to be sick over it. The men did not come that night. They did not come the next day either, nor the one after that. Tubin found her on the third morning, the first face she had let near her since the hall. He was the youngest of the trackers, and the kindest, all elbows and worry, and he stood in her doorway, turning his cap over in his hands as though it had wronged him. "You have to come out," he said. "You cannot just sit up here in the dark, Nissa. The whole town talks of nothing else. Half of them think you are dead in a cell already, and the other half are half in love with you for it. Let them talk. Talk is free." Rensa arrived behind him, older and broader, and never at a loss for words, carrying a covered dish and a face like a coming storm. She set it down hard enough to rattle the plate and folded her arms. "You great fool," Rensa said, with enormous affection. "You, wonderful, reckless, half-witted fool. Have you the smallest idea what you have done? I know exactly what I have done. I gave up my oath and insulted the king, and I am waiting for him to come and collect the rest of me for it. Eat that yourself. I have no stomach for it. That is the thing," Tobin said, and something in his voice made her look up. "That is what everyone is trying to understand. He has not moved against you. Not a word from the keep, not a summons, not a fine, not so much as a cross look. Merrick has been up there every day, begging to take your punishment onto himself, and the king will not even speak of it. It is as though the whole thing never happened, as though you never happened at all." And that, Nissa would think much later, was somehow the cruelest thing he could have done to her. Not a cell, not the block. Just silence. The same silence he had wrapped around her in the hall, telling her plainly that she and her dead scouts, and her whole burning grief, had not been worth even the trouble of an answer. She was still turning that bitter thought over when the sound came up from the yard below, one horse fast over the wet stones, then stopping. A voice she did not know, asking a question. And then Rensa, who had gone to the window, went very still and very quiet, which was a thing Rensa never did. "Nissa," she said, "there is a rider in the yard, a gray horse with the moon on its harness, royal colors." She turned slowly. "He is asking for you by name." Nissa rose. Her mouth had gone dry. So, here it was at last, come in daylight, and in the open, which was somehow worse. She went down the narrow stair on legs that did not feel like her own, stepped out into the pale morning, and the rider looked down at her from the tall gray horse, and did not draw a blade, and did not read a sentence. He held out a single folded letter, sealed in silver wax with the pressed shape of the moon. "From the Moon Palace, into your hand only. I am to wait for no answer." Then he wheeled the gray about and was gone back up the hill before she had touched the thing, and Nissa stood alone in the yard, with the whole town watching from their doorways and the weight of the sealed letter in her hand like a stone dropped into still water. She broke the seal. The hand inside was not a clerk's careful copying. It was quick and dark and slanting and entirely a man's own, and she knew, before she read a word, whose hand it was. It was short. It did not sentence her. It did not forgive her. It commanded her to return to the Moon Palace within 3 days by the king's own word, for there was a thing that needed doing that no other nose in the whole realm could do, and the king would hear no refusal of it. And at the very bottom, beneath the slashing dark line of his name, there was one more line, added after, the ink, a shade fresher than the rest, as though he had signed it and then come back to write the thing he truly meant. "Tell no one you have had this," it read. "Not the town, not your friends, not Marek. Trust no one until you stand in front of me." Nissa read it 3 times in the cold bright yard, and the ground she had trusted her whole life to hold still beneath her feet tilted slowly and completely sideways. The letter had told her how to come, and it was not by the great gate. She went up on the third night, hooded, to a small postern on the palace's northern face that she had passed 100 times on patrol and never once seen open. A silent servant waited with a shuttered lamp and led her up through servant stairs and cold passages that ran behind the warm, bright rooms of the keep-like veins behind a face, until a plain door was opened and she was put through it, and it was shut at her back. She stood in a small, warm room lined, floor to ceiling, with maps. Not the proud gilt maps of the council hall, but working ones, scratched over in a dozen hands, the border drawn true with all its rot laid bare. And at the long table, in his shirt sleeves, with no crown and no cloak and no court to play to, stood the king. "You came," Corvin said. He sounded, of all things, relieved. "I was not certain you would." The letter did not read as a request. "No, I suppose it did not." He set down his pen. "You let me walk out of your hall in front of your whole court and said nothing. And now you send for me in the dark and tell me to trust no one. So say your piece, your grace. I have had 3 days of it, making no sense. It makes perfect sense. You lack only the one piece that arranges the rest." He turned one of the maps to face her, the Fenmarch drawn in fine dark ink, every ward along a low water marked. "You stood in my hall and told me the border is dying of neglect. You were wrong about the cause. Neglect is a man forgetting. This is a man remembering, very carefully, which threads to cut, lay the losses on a map, as I have, night after night, and it stops looking like carelessness and starts looking like a hand." The room went very quiet. "Someone is bleeding my border, on purpose, for 3 years, and not one soul has thought to call it what it is, no one but you. You stood in a room full of my people and named the wound aloud. Do you understand now why I could not answer you? If I had risen and said you were right, if I had kept you by me before them all, then whoever has spent 3 years bleeding my border in the dark would have learned in one evening that I know, and that I know because of you. You would have been dead inside a week, a fall from a wall, a hunting accident like the others. So I let you go and let the whole court watch me do it, and let them think I found you beneath my notice. A woman beneath the king's notice is a woman. No one troubles to kill." Nissa found she had stopped breathing. The silence that had felt like the cruelest contempt, the silence she had carried out into the rain, like a splinter, turned slowly over in her hands and showed her its other face. "You let me walk away to keep me alive," she said slowly. "I let you walk away because I needed you alive and could not tell you so." He said it plainly, without apology, and the plainness was worse than any apology. "I have need of the best nose in the realm, and you insulted me too publicly and too honestly to be anyone's creature but your own. Your temper cleared you faster than a year of watching could. So I am asking you to come back. Not to the guard. To me. Help me follow this, to the hand that holds it before it bleeds the realm, past saving. And if I say, no, then you walk back down the hill, and I never trouble you again. And I am sorry for it, but I will not make you." She believed him, and that undid her guard more than any command could have. "They will ask why the woman who shamed you is suddenly at your side. You cannot tell them the truth of it, no." And here something flickered at the corner of his mouth that was almost a smile and almost an apology. "So I will give them a lie. They will swallow whole. I will restore you before them all. Name you, my own tracker, sworn to my shadow, at my side by day and night. And I will let them draw the conclusion they will draw." When it landed, the heat went straight up her neck. "You mean to let them think, I have warmed your bed. I mean to let them think what they like." A king who honors the woman who shamed him makes no sense. And what makes no sense frightens people into looking closely. But a king who has lost his head over a hard-eyed woman from the marsh, that they understand in their bones, they will smirk and gossip and stop looking. because they believe they already know the answer. She hated that it was clever. She hated more that it would work. You have thought about this a great deal. I have thought about very little else for 3 days, which is longer than I care to admit to have spent on a woman who called me a fool, who could not find water with a map in each hand. A torch in his teeth, she corrected, before she could stop herself. Yes, now it was a real smile. Brief, and there and gone, that she should have said no. Every sensible bone she owned told her to. But she thought of the low water, and the thinned wards, and the pattern he had laid on the map that she could not now unsee. Show me why you are so sure. If I am to hunt your hand for you, I will not do it on your word alone. Something in his face changed, and she understood she had asked for the thing he had been both dreading and hoping she would ask. He drew a single worn page from beneath the maps and set it before her, and his voice lost all its ease. The wards on the low water were not thinned by an accident of supply. The order to strip them came down in writing from inside this palace 6 days before your scout died on that ground. Whoever holds the hand I am hunting spent that boy on purpose to prove the border could be bled, and the crown would call it luck. He looked at her, and there was something close to grief in his eyes, and it was aimed at her. Tior did not die of neglect, Nissa. He was spent, and I am sorry to be the one who puts that in your hands. He made it true the next morning, before the whole court, exactly as he had promised. She stood in the great hall where days before she had thrown her oath at his feet, and this time she wore no mud, and the king came down from the high seat, and in front of every noble and every whispering clerk, took up the small silver moon and pinned it back to her collar with his own hands. His fingers were unhurried at her throat. He let them be. She understood that every slow, deliberate movement was aimed at the watching room, and she understood, too, that it did not matter that she understood, because her pulse did not care for the difference, and beat hard against his knuckles all the same. My own tracker, he said, loud enough to carry. Sworn to my shadow, then, softer, pitched to be half heard, which was worse. Do try to keep up, huntress. The hall made the sound she had known it would make, a low ripple of scandal and delight. A duchess hid a smile behind her fan. And at the edge of it stood Marek, her Marek, who had begged for the right to be punished in her place, and his face was doing something she could not read, some struggle between relief and a thing that was not relief at all, and it was gone before she could name it. Then the performance was over, and the work began. And the work, at least, she knew how to do. They gave her the supply records, years of them, and where a clerk would have read numbers, she read a trail. A clerk saw a shipment of iron marked, received, and short. She saw the iron move, saw where it had been and where it went, and the exact place along the road where it walked off into nothing. She spread the tallies across the map table, and she did not add them, she followed them, the way she would follow a deer through changing ground, by the sign it could not help but leave. And the losses did not scatter the way honest waste scatters. They funneled. Every vanished cart, every short delivery, every relief that turned back, threaded through the same 2 way stations on the eastern road and passed under the same seal before it disappeared. There, she said on the second night, laying her finger on the map. It is not lost all over the border. It is lost here, always, and here, whoever does this, is not clever everywhere. He is clever in one place, and lazy in the rest. And the lazy part is where he lives. She braced for a platitude. Instead, the king leaned in beside her, close enough that she felt the warmth of him along her arm, and studied the 2 points she had marked, and asked the exact right question: who signs off the eastern road? That is what I would like to know. Then know it, he said. You have my leave to open any storehouse in this realm, and question any quartermaster in it in my name. If a man will not answer you, send him to me. He said it as though handing her a tool, not a favor, and she found she did not know what to do with a king who did that. She kept waiting, for him to be the fool she had called him. He refused to oblige her. He knew his own maps. He remembered figures she had mentioned once. When she was wrong, he said so, and when she was right, he did not pretend he had thought of it first. And once, very late, with the lamp guttering, and both of them, tired past pride, he told her without being asked what it was to be crowned at 19, over a realm that had already decided you were a boy playing at a man's work, and to learn that the surest way to be left alone to do that work was to let them go on thinking you a fool. They watch a serious king, he said. They do not watch a charming one. So, I gave them a charming one, and did the serious part in the dark, and I have been very lonely in the dark, if you want the truth of it, which I suspect you do, since you seem incapable of wanting anything else. She did not answer that. She was too busy being furious at herself, because somewhere in those long lamplit nights, the man she had come to catch out had quietly become a man she watched, for reasons that had nothing to do with catching him out, and she caught herself doing it, and hated it, and did not stop. The trail led inward. That was the thing that finally turned her cold. Follow the vanished shipments far enough. And they did not run off toward some rival across the border. They ran home. They ran up the eastern road and through the two-way stations, and in through the palace's own lower gates, into the great underlevels beneath the keep, where the crown's stores were kept, and there the trail simply stopped, the way a trail stops when it has been swept. So they went down into the dark to find where it had been swept to the two of them, on a night with no moon, with a single, shuttered lamp between them, and her nose doing the work her eyes could not. The underlevels were cold and vast and smelled of stone and old grain and lamp oil, and she moved through them, slow, reading the air. Then, 3 turnings deep, in a passage that should have been empty and shut for a season, she stopped so suddenly that the king walked into her. "What?" Corvin breathed. She lifted a hand for his silence. Under the dust and the oil and the cold, dead stone, faint and fresh and entirely wrong, she had caught it. Men, more than one. Sweat and leather, and the particular sharp tang of drawn steel, kept too long against a nervous palm. "Close. We are not alone down here," she whispered, and reached for the knife at her belt. "And they are not storekeepers." The lamp went out. It did not gutter. A hand she never heard coming closed it in an instant, and the dark came down complete. And in that first blind heartbeat, Nissa heard the soft scuff of a boot committing to a rush, and knew, with the cold certainty of the marsh, that they had walked straight into the jaws of something that had been waiting for them. She did not think. She shoved the king back into the angle of the wall and turned to meet it, and the first blade came out of the black exactly where her throat had been a breath before. She was already gone from the spot. She had spent 10 years learning to fight by everything except her eyes. She caught the arm by the wind of it, turned the wrist the way the low water had taught her, and drove her shoulder into the body behind it. A grunt, a stumble, the bright clatter of a knife across stone. Another was already there. She smelled him first, leather and fierce sweat, and dropped under the cut she knew was coming. Steel struck sparks off the wall where her head had been. She came up inside his reach, put her elbow into something soft, and he folded. 3 of them, and they were good, and they were not trying to rob her. Every stroke came for a killing line, throat and gut, fast and silent. These were not thieves who had stumbled on the king by luck. They had been placed. They had known he would come. She gave ground slowly, on purpose, keeping her body always between the blades and the black corner. Where she had put him, a cut opened hot along her forearm, and she let it, because closing that line would have opened another nearer him. Behind her, the king had gone low and still and ready, which some far cold part of her mind marked as wrong. Not the panic of a soft court creature, but the calm of a man who had done this before. She had no breath for the thought. She broke a wrist she never saw by feel, and heard its owner hiss. For a moment, the dark held nothing but breathing and the small, steady drip of her own blood onto the floor. Then the sound came. Low, 2 notes, and a fall. Soft as a nightbird settling a whistle. And every blade in the dark broke off at once. Not scattering. Not fleeing in the blind panic of thieves surprised at their work. Withdrawing, clean, and together, the ordered retreat of trained men, called home by someone whose word they did not think to question. Boots moved away in perfect time until the last of them was gone. Nissa stood with her blade up and her arm on fire, and did not lower it for a long while. When she finally let her breath go, it shook once. Then steadied. "Bring your light back," she said. "They are gone. They were called off." A scrape, a spark, and the lamp bloomed gold again in the king's steady hands, not a tremor in them. She turned and looked at Corvin, at his level eyes, and the complete absence of surprise on his face, and something inside her went quiet and hard. "You are bleeding," he said gently, and reached for her arm. She stepped back out of his reach. Do not tend to me and be kind to me while you are lying to me, because I will not be able to hold both in my head at once." Her voice had dropped and gone very level, the way it did when she had a trail at last under her hand. "Someone just tried to open your throat in the dark, and you are not surprised. A man is only unsurprised by a thing he has seen before. This is not the first time they have come for you, is it?" He was quiet a moment too long, and the quiet was answer enough. "How many?" she said. "3. Before tonight," he said it evenly, as if reciting a tally. "A girth strap cut nearly through before a hunt. A stare waxed slick the morning I was to use it. A tincture that was not the one my physician left. This is the 4th, and you told no one." "I told the one person in the realm I was certain had no hand in it." His pale eyes held hers. "You! Tonight! Because you would not stop until you had the truth. And because I find I no longer want to keep it from you, which is its own kind of danger." She would not let herself hear the second half of that, and reached instead for the thing that was solid. That whistle was no cutthroat signal. It was a scout's call, a border call. I have blown it myself on the low water to draw men out of cover clean and quiet. The hands that came for you tonight were trained on the frontier, where I was trained. Whoever is bleeding your border, and whoever is trying to kill you, are not two hands, Your Grace. They are one. And that hand knows the marsh as well as I do. She watched the knowledge move behind his eyes, and watched him decide again how much of it to give her, and the deciding was the thing that finally lit her temper. "You already knew that," she said. "You knew the men who hunt you, smell of the frontier, and you brought a frontier woman here, and dressed her as your favorite, so no one would look twice, and you have been waiting to see whether I would notice it myself. Have I passed your little test, Your Grace?" It was not a test. His composure cracked, just at the edge. "It was the only way to be sure of you that did not cost you your life. If I was wrong, watching your face would have killed you. So yes, I let you find it on your own, and you found it in one night with 3 knives on you, and I would admire it more openly if you were not looking at me as though you mean to add a 4th yourself." "The night is young," said Nissa. And to her fury, the king laughed, bitten off quickly, and in the gold light with her blood on the floor between them, she felt the answering pull at her own mouth, and hated it. Hated that even now some part of her had begun the slow and stupid work of not wanting to be anywhere else. She turned for the stare before he could read it on her face. "Bind that arm," he said quietly behind her. "I have lost enough good things to that border. I would take it very ill to lose my tracker to a scratch." She did not turn around. But she stopped. One hand flat on the cold stone, a moment longer than she meant to. Then she went up into the dark, and did not let herself name the thing his voice had done to her, and told herself, the whole way up, that she was only keeping score. She bound the arm herself, and told no one, and after that, she did not leave his side. It made a certain sense. She told the part of her that demanded sense. A tracker who had found the scent did not walk away from it, so she stayed close to the bait and watched the dark. That was all it was. She told herself so on the walls at night when he stood a shade too near her in the wind, and in the map room when their hands crossed and neither moved for a beat too long, and believed it less each time, until she stopped bothering and simply carried the wanting about like a stone in her chest and hoped it did not show. It showed. She knew it showed because he had begun to answer it, in small, unbearable ways. A hand at the small of her back that stayed a moment past steering, his voice dropping low and private in a room full of people, meant for her alone. The way he would look at her mouth in the middle of her own sentence, and then, unhurried, back up to her eyes. She did not know what game he played, and that was the worst of it, because she could not find the seam where the cover ended and the man began. Whatever the storybooks said, kings did not lose their hearts to marsh-born trackers who smelled of the low water. She knew what she was, weathered brown by 10 years of wind, hard-handed, a scar through one eyebrow and a body built for walking and killing, and not one soft, courtly thing about it. She had learned young, where a woman like her stood, and was too sensible to unlearn it now for a charming man, with tired eyes, who was likely only lonely. So she guarded him, and hunted his hand, and wanted him in silence, and meant to go on that way forever, if she had to. She lasted 11 days. It came apart in the map room, past midnight, after a night of chasing the eastern seal in circles and getting nowhere. She was tired and raw and out of patience with all of it, and he was sitting across the table watching her, instead of the maps, and had been for some time. "Stop," she said, without looking up. "Stop what? Looking at me like that? Whatever it is you do. The game. The performance, whatever you call it, when there is no one to perform for. There is no one here. Corvin. The cord is asleep, you can put it down." He was quiet. Then, "What makes you so certain? It is a performance." She looked up. He was not smiling. That was what undid her first. He had 100 smiles, for 100 purposes, and he wore none of them. "Because it has to be," she said, rougher than she meant. "Because the other thing does not happen. Not to me. I have kept your secrets and bled in your dark, but I cannot also stand here and be toyed with. I am not built to want a thing I am not allowed to keep, and you are teaching me to want it anyway, and it is cruel, and I am asking you to stop." For a long moment he did not move. Then he rose, slow, and came around the table, and she held her ground only because retreating would have been worse. "You think I am playing," he said quietly, stopping close enough that she had to tip her chin to hold his eyes. "You, who read the whole world by what it cannot hide, read me. Then use that nose you are so proud of, and tell me what I want." And God's help her, she did. She breathed him in the way she had refused to let herself for 11 days, and there it was, unmistakable, pouring off him, thick and warm and dark as banked coals. Not charm, not cover, want. Plain and helpless and aimed at her, with no audience anywhere to see it. It went through her low and hot and folded every sensible objection clean in two. "That is not possible," she whispered. "It is inconvenient," he agreed, "and dangerous, and altogether real, and I have managed it while you told yourself I could not mean it." His hand came up, slow enough that she could have stopped it and did not, and traced the scar through her eyebrow, as though it were something rare. "The most alive thing in this whole dead gilded palace. You have no notion, do you?" "Tell me to go, and I will go," he said, low, "tonight, and never lay this at your feet again. Or, she breathed, "or tell me to show you." The map room was very quiet. Her pulse was very loud. "Show me," she said. He kissed her, and every careful, guarded, sensible thing she had ever built in her life came down at once, silent as falling snow. His hand fisted in her hair, and his mouth was warm and certain, and she made a sound against it she would have died of shame for if she had had a single thought left to spare on shame. Her hands found the front of his shirt and pulled, and the rough, helpless noise he made against her mouth she felt to the very ends of her. He lifted her onto the table as if she weighed nothing at all, and the map slid to the floor unheeded, and for once in her hard and watchful life, she let herself simply have a thing she wanted, and did not once, in all of it, count the cost. It was after, in the quiet, with her cheek on his chest and his heart slowing under her ear, that the thing happened for which she had no name, a warmth that was not the warmth of skin. A thread, fine and bright and new, pulling taut somewhere behind her ribs, in a place she had never before had cause to look. For one strange breath she felt, distinct and clear and not her own, a wash of feeling that was his. Relief. A tenderness so large and so undefended that it frightened her worse than any blade in the dark ever had. She went very still. She was a wolf, for all she had spent her life on 2 feet, and she knew what the old tales said, a bright thread behind the ribs meant. She knew, and did not want to know, and shut her eyes, and told herself it was only the strangeness of the hour, but she felt him feel it too, felt his heart stumble under her ear, felt the thread flare as he turned toward it in the dark, and she lay rigid, waiting for him to name it. He was too clever for that. He only pressed his mouth to her hair and stayed silent, and held her, and let her pretend, because he had spent his whole life learning the moment a truth would send a frightened thing bolting. And Nissa lay in the arms of the king of the moon palace, with a mate bond flickering to life in her chest, like a coal she had never asked to be handed, and stared into the dark, and was more afraid than she had been with 3 knives on her, because knives she knew how to survive. King Osric of Emberhold came down out of the north to weigh with his own eyes whether the young Alpha King of the Moon Palace was a man worth binding an army to, or a boy whose realm would be simpler to carve once he fell. Corvin needed the northern swords the way the border needed relief. Osric at his back would make him untouchable. Osric's doubt would leave him a wounded thing in open water, and every circling house would catch the scent of blood. So, there was a feast, and dancing, and the slow, careful reading of faces, because that was how such things were decided. They put Nissa in dark green, because the king asked it, and she stood at the edge of the bright loud room like a hawk dressed as a songbird, watching the doors, the cups, Osric watching Corvin. And she watched Corvin be, for the northern king, the most effortless creature in the realm, and only she could see the labor of it, the ease sitting a hair too smooth over something braced and tired beneath. He drew her out to a dark upper gallery, later above the hall, where the music thinned and the cold came in through the arrow slits, and for a moment neither of them performed anything at all. "You are tired," she said, watching him. "Not the tiredness you let them see the other one. I have worn one face or another in that room since I was a boy," he said low, looking down at the dancers through the stone, "so that no one looks past it to the parts of me that are not finished yet. Some nights I cannot find the seam between the face and the man. Tonight I can. You are standing on it." She reached up and turned his jaw so he had to look at her. His breath caught. "This one," she said. "The face you are wearing right now, with no one watching but me. That one is yours, and I have come to like it a great deal. The man under all the others, him most of all." She had never said a thing so bare. Something cracked open behind his eyes. "Nissa," he said, rough, and then he kissed her, there in the cold and the dark, and it was nothing like the map room. Not heat, not hunger, but relief and fear, and a tenderness so large it had nowhere to go. And it poured through the bright thread behind her ribs all at once, his feeling, distinct and whole and utterly his, flooding into her through the place where they touched, until she could not tell where he ended, and she began. The bond snapped fully awake between them like a struck string. She wrenched back with a gasp, her hand flat to her own chest as though scalded. He knew. She watched it land in his face, the wonder and the terror of it together, watched him take a step toward her, watched the desperate need in him to close the space and prove it real. "You felt that," he said. "Nissa, tell me you felt that." And every buried thing in her, Every lesson, about wanting what she could not keep. Every orphan's certainty that the good thing was only ever the bait in a trap, rose in her throat at once, and she heard herself choose the cruelest small word she owned. It was nothing, she said. The wine, the hour. Nothing, Corvin. He went still. The light in his face guttered like a candle in a draught. Nothing, he repeated, very quietly. And she felt it through the bond before he could shudder it, the clean, bright pain of it, and hated herself, and did not take it back. She watched him draw the shutters down on his side of the thread until it dimmed to almost nothing, and it was the loneliest thing she had ever felt. Of course, he said, forgive me. Then he put his court face back on, because Osric was waiting, and a private cup had been laid for the two kings in the small warm antechamber off the hall. And a king did not keep his ally waiting, because a woman had broken his heart on a gallery. She followed him down, because following him was her office now, and because she did not trust the space between them to keep him breathing. In the antechamber a page she did not know waited, with the ceremonial cup, the northern mead poured, and standing ready, and as Corvin crossed to it, wounded and closed, and not himself, Nissa's wolf came up under her skin snarling before her mind had caught anything at all. She hit the cup from the air a breath before it reached his mouth. It shattered on the flags. Mead spread dark across the stone. The page was already gone, melted out a side door into the crowd, and she was down on one knee over the wreck of it with her nose full of the truth. The bitter almond ghost, hiding under the honey and the spice. Do not touch it, she said, and her voice did not sound like her own. There is death in it, under the sweet. Breathe it, and you will find it. She watched his nostrils flare, watched him catch it, watched the color go out of his face. Not for himself, she understood only later, but for the man seated one thin wall away. Osric is through that door, Corvin said, gripping her wrist, with half his northern court. If it becomes known that a man was poisoned at my table, while my ally sat within reach, there is no alliance. There is a northern army that decides the Moon Palace is carrion, and there is war before the thaw. You will say nothing to anyone. Do you understand me? Someone just tried to kill you again, with Osric's own cup, and I cannot let a living soul know it tonight. Trust me this once, Nissa. His eyes held hers, and the thread he had shuttered opened just a crack, enough for her to feel exactly what the asking cost him. Please. Every part of her that was a hunter said no. But the bond was open a hair, and she could feel him. And she heard herself say, all right, I promise. Relief crossed his face. He pressed his mouth to her brow, quick and grateful, and then the mask slid home and he stepped back through the door to smile at the man whose gift had just tried to murder him. She gave him a slow 100 count. Then she broke her word, because she had just watched death miss the man she was falling for by the width of her own wolf, and she was not made to stand by and let him carry it alone. She kept to the shadows. She watched him smile Osric toward the doors, then slip away down a servant's stair the instant the northern king was clear, and watched the smile fall off his face the moment he thought himself unseen, and her stomach fell with it. Ah! She followed him down, and down, into the cold lower keep, and her blood ran colder with every turning, because she knew these passages. They did not lead to his rooms, they did not lead to the map room. They led to the huntmaster's quarters, to Merrick. The door of the record room stood ajar, a blade of lamplight across the floor. She crossed to it, without a sound, and eased it open. Corvin stood inside with a sheaf of Merrick's private papers open in his hands, in a room he had no earthly reason to be in, going carefully through the life of the man who had raised her. For a long moment neither of them moved. Nissa, he said, very calm, very steady, it is not what you think. He set the papers down slowly, the way a man sets down a weapon to show his hands. Say it then, Nissa said. Her voice had gone very flat. Whatever it is, say it fast. I have hunted the hand for 3 years. For the last two of them I have known whose it is, and I could do nothing, because knowing is not proof, and the man who holds it commands every scout and tracker on the border, and the loyalty of half the army besides. If I moved on him without proof, past all argument, there would be blood in the streets by dawn and my head on the frontier road by summer. He looked at her, and his voice, gentled into the careful register he kept for frightened councilmen, the one he had not used on her in weeks, and hearing it turned on her now was worse than any blow. The hand is Marek Nissa. Your huntmaster, it has always been Marek. The words would not resolve into meaning, they were only sounds. No, the wards on the low water were stripped on his written order. The eastern seal is his. The supplies bleed into House Corridon through relays, his own trackers run, and the men who come for me in the dark blow the border calls he taught them. He has been draining the realm to buy the swords that will steady it once I am gone, and House Corridon means to hold the regency, and Marek means to hold House Corridon. Teor died, to settle a line in his ledger. I am sorry. I have been sorry for 2 years, and I could tell no living soul, least of all the child he raised from the dirt to love him. No. She said it again, but underneath the word something cold and quiet had already begun to assemble itself, because she could hear it now, all of it, clicking into place with the awful neatness of a snare she had walked across 100 times and never once seen. You needed someone who could walk into his rooms and never be doubted, his own foundling, the one soul in the realm he would never think to watch. He did not answer. He held her eyes and did not deny it. That is the real why, she said slowly. Not my nose. Not because I stood in your hall and told the truth. You needed his tracker, and a grieving fool climbed onto a chair in your hall and handed herself to you whole. Nissa, he began. Tell me I have it wrong. Her voice split straight down the middle. Corvin. Tell me I am wrong about him. He held her eyes, and he was silent, and his silence was the loudest thing she had ever heard. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She had been so stupid. All those long lamplit nights, the questions, who signs the Eastern Road? Who holds the seal when Marek is away? Who taught the border calls? And she had thought he was interested in the work. She had thought he was interested in her. There is one more thing, Corvin said quietly, and it is the worst of it. He came around the desk, and she did not retreat because she had not the strength left to. That night in my hall, everything you threw at me. The border dying of neglect. A king too idle to learn the names of his dead. Those were not your words, Nissa. I have heard them for years in reports and whispers, always running back to the same spring. They are Marek's words. His grievance, his hatred of a crown, he means to pull down. He poured them into you across 10 years of raising you, a drop at a time, until you believed the shape of them was your own, and then pointed you at me, like a loosed arrow, and stood back to watch you fly. The ground she had stood on her whole life gave way beneath her, because it was true. She could hear it now. Marek across 100 cold nights on the low water, grinding his teeth over the orders that never came. The boy who was too soft to rule. A king ought to know. She had carried his fury in her own mouth for years, and never once felt the join. She had thrown away her whole life before a hall of witnesses over a wound another man had opened in her and salted for his own ends. You knew all of it, she said, and you watched me put my own body between you and a blade, and you let me into your bed, and you never once told me the truth. Why not me, Corvin? He was quiet, and when the answer came, it was barely a breath. Because I did not think you would believe me. He raised you. He is the only father you have ever had. If I had stood you up in that map room and told you the man who pulled you from a ditch was selling the realm to buy a crown, you would have named me a liar and gone straight to him, and he would have known I knew, and by morning you would both have vanished off the frontier and I would have lost the war and you in a single night. His jaw tightened. So I said nothing. I told myself I would tell you when I had proof enough to make it stick. And I let you fall in love with a man who was using you to reach your father. Because I was too much a coward to risk you before I was sure of you, and I was right. You do not believe me even now. It is on your face. And that was what broke it, because he was not wrong. Every instinct she owned was screaming that there was a mistake. Not Marek. Never Marek. She would stake her life on him. So, she reached past the new wound to the oldest one instead, the one that had never fully closed. It does not matter whether I believe you, she said, and her voice had gone to ash. You used me. You looked me in the eye across that table night after night, and let me believe I was wanted for my own sake, when the whole time I was a key. You needed cut a bond, does not mend that. Nothing mends that. The tears came, and she let them fall and did not wipe them, because wiping them would have meant she cared what he saw. I was a fool to think a king could want a marsh-born woman for anything but her uses. You taught me the lesson, after all. I only learned it a little late, Nissa. He reached for her, and his hand was shaking. Please, that is not what you are to me. Good night, your grace, she said, and turned and walked out into the dark of the corridor. And this time, it was her leaving him without a word, and she did not look back to see his face. Marek was waiting in the corridor, 10 paces on, standing in the dark, the way he used to stand at the edge of the training yard when she was small, patient, certain she would come to him in the end. And God's help her, wrecked and reeling. She nearly did. Nissa. His hands came down warm and sure on her shoulders. You are white as a corpse. What has he done to you? And because it hurt too much to hold, she let a piece of it out. It was all a lie. Marek. He never wanted me. He only used me. Marek's face folded into sorrow. I know, he said gently. I have known a long while, and I hope to spare you it. I am sorry, girl. Truly. He drew a breath, and his jaw set as if to brace for a hard blow. But it is worse than a faithless bed, and I need you steady now, because you are the only one who can stop what he means to do. What he means to do, she repeated. He means to have his war. Marek's voice dropped urgent, confiding. The voice that had taught her to read a trail and trust him over her own eyes. He has wanted Emberhold's timber and iron since the day he was crowned, and Osric will never give them freely, so he means to take them. There was poison at the feast tonight, girl, in the northern cup made to look like Osric's own hand. Tomorrow he will stand before the northern court and swear his ally tried to murder him under a flag of peace, and he will have his war, and 10,000 boys like your Tayor will die in the snow to feed a lie. Unless someone the court will believe stands up first and tells the truth of him. And there it was. Because Marek had made one mistake, and it was small, and it was fatal, and Nissa's whole life had been the reading of small fatal signs. No one knew about the poison. The page had vanished. The cup had shattered in a shut antechamber with only herself and the king to see, and he had sworn her to silence for the sake of the very alliance Marek now claimed he meant to break, and she had told no living soul. There was exactly one way Marek could know. A northern cup had been poisoned tonight. He knew because he had sent it. Nothing moved in her face. She had spent 10 years keeping the trail off her expression while the quarry watched, and she kept it off now, though her heart had begun to slam. Corvin had told the truth. Every word. The man whose hands were warm on her shoulders had thinned the wards that killed Tayor, and sent the cup that nearly killed the king, and stood here now lying to her as easily as breathing, reaching for the blade of her grief to point wherever he pleased. She let her face crumple. It was not hard. What do I do? She whispered. Tell me what to do. Marek's eyes sharpened with something almost like triumph. You come with me to the northern court now, before he can speak first, and you tell King Osric what you are, the king's own woman, who has seen the truth of him at last, and that Corvin set the poison himself. From your mouth, girl, not one soul will doubt it, and when he falls, good men will steady the realm and hold it in trust, I among them. It cannot come from a captain grasping for power, but the king's own betrayed bride, and his voice went soft as a blessing. You, they will believe. They will believe me, Nissa echoed. Yes. All right, she said. Take me to them. It was the longest walk she had ever taken. She had nothing but her word to turn his own snare inside out, and one wrong step meant a knife in the belly of the realm and a war in the snow. Merrick's hand rode the small of her back the whole way, certain of his weapon. Osric of Emberhold had taken the great East Council chamber, and it was full when they entered the Northern King, grey and hard at the head of the long table, Corvin standing apart between his advisors, with his face smooth to nothing. He looked up when Nissa came in behind Marek, and for half a heartbeat she saw the whole of it cross his face, the leap of hope, then the sick understanding of who she walked in beside. Then the shutter coming down. He thought she had come to bury him. She could not spare him a glance to say otherwise. She had one throw, and all of it hung on Marek believing, to the last instant, that the blade in his hand was still his own. Your Grace, Marek said, bowing to Osric with grave sorrow. It shames me to bring this before you, but there has been treachery under this roof tonight, and my own foundling has seen it. He laid a gentle hand toward her. Nissa. Tell the Northern King what you saw. Every face swung to her. Osric leaned forward, hard-eyed. Corvin looked at her as a man looks at his own scaffold. She met his eyes. I am sorry, she told him without a word. I should have believed you. Then she turned to the Northern King. I saw nothing of the sort, she said, because it did not happen. King Osric the Huntmaster is lying to you, and I can prove it in the space of one breath. The rune drew tight as a bent bow. Marek's hand fell from her back. He has just told you there was poison in the Northern Cup tonight, Nissa said, her voice carrying flat and clear. I am the only soul alive who knows that is true, because I am the one who struck the cup from the king's hand and smelled the death in it. And King Corvin swore me to silence over it not 1 hour ago, for the sake of the peace between your realms. I have told no one. Not a servant, not a guard, not this man. So, ask yourself, Your Grace, how the Huntmaster comes to know there was poison in that cup at all, unless it was his own hand that filled it. Osric's head turned slowly toward Marek. This is grief talking, Marek said, his voice gone flat and careful. He has broken the girl and unstrung her wits. Then a search will cost you nothing, Nissa said. Send your own men to the Huntmaster's quarters and his relay on the eastern road, while he stands here and cannot reach them, and see whether they turn up a heartbroken girl's fancy or a poisoner's ledger, House Corridon's coin, and the same bitter almond that spilled on the stone tonight. That does seem an easy thing to prove, Osric said very quietly, and lifted a finger toward his own guards, and Marek's face changed. The grave, kind father was gone as though he had never lived, and what stood in his place was cornered and cold and out of lies. He came at her, and the little skinning knife was already sliding from his sleeve, the one he had carried since before she was born, and half the room had not yet understood there was danger in it at all. But this was the one thing in all the world she knew how to do, and he was the one who had taught her. And he had forgotten what he had made. She turned into him instead of away, caught the knife wrist as it came and used his own weight and the old drilled motion he had beaten into her arms 10,000 times to fold him down and face first onto the stone. His arm wrenched up behind him. The blade rang loose across the floor. She dropped her knee between his shoulders and put her mouth to his ear. You taught me to read a trail, she said, low, for him, alone. You should not have left one. Then the Northern Guards took him and bore him out, and it was finished. They put Marek in the cells beneath the old fort, and the search turned up all of it, the ledgers and the coin and the poison, and House Corridon folded like wet paper the moment the crown came for it. Osric of Emberhold, who prized nothing so highly as a realm that could find the rot in its own house and cut it clean, signed the alliance inside the week. By every measure a kingdom keeps, Corvin had won. He did not look like a man who had won, standing in the emptied council chamber with her after the guards had gone. You saved my life, he said. After everything I did to you, I came to stop a traitor, Nissa said flat. That is all it was. Do not make it more. The light in his face flickered and went careful. The bond is real, Nissa. You felt it on the gallery. I know you did. That is not a thing either of us can undo. It does not matter whether it is real. She made her voice cold, because cold was the only thing that would hold. A bond does not hand a man back the trust he spent. You held my gaze across that table for weeks and used me to reach the only father I ever had and let me love you while you did it. Marek made me a weapon and aimed me at you, and you found me lying loaded on the ground and simply picked me up and pointed me back the other way. And between the pair of you, not once did anyone ask the woman in the middle what she wanted. She stepped back from him. I am glad you are alive. You will be a good king now. I think with the rock cut out, but I cannot trust you. I do not know that I ever will again. She saw the understanding reach his eyes, that he had broken a thing which might not mend. Nissa, please, I will do anything. Then let me go, she said, without a word. You managed it once. You were good at it. It was a cruel thing to say, and she knew exactly where to set it. And she watched it strike home, and she walked out. She was made huntmaster before the next moon was done. There was no one else fit for it, and she was good at it. She cut out the rot. Marek had worked into the border for years, put honest men on the eastern road, sent relief to the low water that actually arrived. The scouts stopped dying of bad luck. The city, which had watched her put the traitor face down on the stone with her bare hands, half worshipped her for it. She ought to have been content, and told herself she was, most days, and believed it about as well as she believed anything she told herself. The king did not make it easy. The letters began a month in. His own hand, the quick, dark, slanting script she had first met on a summons that upended her life, coming now near daily to the huntmaster's quarters. Some were short, some ran for pages. Some were not about her at all. A question on the frontier relays? A dispute over pensions for the border dead? As though her plain, honest answer were still worth having. One read only. I have written the word sorry 100 ways, and every one of them is too small. I do not own a larger one, so I will keep sending the small one until it stacks into something the right size. Another said, you told me, Marek loaded you, and I only aimed you back. You were right. I spent your trust instead of earning it, because I was afraid he would kill me before I had the time to earn it. It is the worst thing I have done, and I have done a great many things. She read everyone. She swore each time she would not read the next, and read it, and answered none. The bond fought her the whole way. An open bond, the old tales warned, only grew, and a grown bond, set for life. So she kept hers clamped shut with both hands, and waited for it to starve. It would not starve. Night after night, the warm, patient thread stayed exactly where it was, and would not fade, and would not let her sleep. Tobin and Rensa had opinions, of course. Let him bleed for it a while, Rensa said in the early week. A man should have to work for a thing he threw away. By the third month, the line had shifted. He settled the back pay for every border widow on the low water, Tobin said one evening, turning his cap in his hands. Quietly. Put no name to it. And how many letters is it now? A great many, said Rensa. 51, said Tobin, who it turned out had been keeping the tally on the back of a duty slate, and went red to the ears when they looked at him. By the 5th month, they had given up subtlety. Talk to the man, Nissa, Rensa said, with respect. You are miserable. He is miserable, and the rest of us have to stand about watching the two of you be wretched at each other across every council table in the realm. It is exhausting to witness. I was used, Nissa said, setting down her pen. I am not queuing up to be used a second time. I am a good huntmaster. The border runs well. I would like to be left in peace to do my work. Then in the 6th month, a letter came that was different. Nissa, you have made yourself plain, and you are right, and I have been a selfish creature not to hear it sooner. You owe me nothing, least of all your peace. I will not trouble your door again. Be well, and be free of me. It is the only thing left that I can give you, which you have actually asked for." She read it twice. This was what she had wanted from the start. So she could not understand why it sat in her chest like a swallowed stone, or why the word free read like a door shutting on the wrong side of her. He kept his word. No more letters, no more flowers left on the training yard at dawn. When they passed in the corridors, he inclined his head, hunt-master even, and courteous, and never cold, not once cold, only finished. "This is what you wanted," she told herself, and did her work, and did it well. And every night the patient thread beneath her ribs held fast, and would not let her be. It was a knock in the black hour before dawn that ended it. Tubin at her door, gray to the lips, Rensa at his shoulder, wearing the particular color of people who have just made a very large mistake. "Do not tell me," Nissa said, already reaching for her sword belt. "What has happened?" "The king," Tobin said. "He is not in the keep. No guard saw him go. His bed has not been slept in. And there is a letter on his desk, Nissa, with your name on the front of it. His chambers told her nothing and everything." The bed unslept in, his crown still in its case and his sword on its stand, so he had not gone as a king goes. He had left his fine horses and taken a plain rounsey from the lower yard, the way a man goes who does not mean to be a king where he is going. And on the desk, a single folded letter closed in silver wax, her name across the front in the quick dark hand that had begun all of this. A letter left behind by a man who has walked into the dark alone reads only one way, and that reading had turned every face gray. Nissa did not open it. Letters were what people sent when they had run out of braver ways to reach each other, and she was not yet out of braver ways. She laid her free palm over her own breastbone, over the thread she had spent 6 months strangling into silence, and for the first time since the gallery she let it open. It came through her like a shutter torn off its hinges. Grief first, vast and lightless, then a still cold resolve, the settled quiet of a man who has decided to stop being a weight on someone he loves. And under it, faint and impossible, the wet green reek of open marsh carried down a bond that had no business carrying a scent, except that hers had always been a tracker's bond, and would find him by whatever thread it could catch. The low water. He had gone to the low water. Alone, on foot at the last, in the dark, to the one ground in the realm most likely to kill a man traveling by himself, the ground she had screamed at him about in his own hall, the ground where Teor had died. She was already moving before the thought had finished forming, and she took the fastest horse in the royal stable and rode the Fenmarch road through the last of the dark, the bond hauling her forward like a drawn rope, and did not let herself dwell on what it meant that the grief on the far end of it had begun, somewhere past the way stations. To go quiet and still. She found him at the ward line on the low water, where the reeds gave way to black shining marsh, standing alone in the gray before dawn, with no cloak and no crown, looking out over the ground that had cost her everything, exactly as she had once demanded and never believed he would. He heard her come. Of course he did. He turned, and the look on his face was that of a man watching something impossible walk out of the mist. "Nissa, you should not be here. That was rather the point of coming alone." "You left?" Without a word. Her voice shook with the ride and the fear. "And 6 months of holding it. You left me a letter and walked into the dark to the one place that could kill you, and you did not say one single word to me." She stopped, because she knew what that was. She had done it to him, in his own hall, a lifetime ago, and understood at last, here in the reeds with her heart in her throat, exactly what her own back had looked like going through those doors. "I promised I would trouble you no more," Corvin said quietly. "This was the last of it, that. So I meant to come and see the border with my own eyes, the way you told me to, and set right what is left of it, and then take myself somewhere you would never again have to look at me." I said no word, because there was no word that would not have been one more chain on you. Letting you go in silence was the only clean thing I had left to give. his mouth twisted, not quite a smile. I have always been better at loving you in silence than out loud. It is the coward's way. I know that now. And there it was, laid bare in the gray light. He had never let her go because she did not matter, but because she mattered more than his own wanting, and had never owned the words to say it. The bond was wide open now, and every word of it rang true. The man who hid everything hiding nothing at all. You great fool, she said, and it came out wet. You colossal, self-sacrificing fool. I did not ride half the night to be let go cleanly. She closed the last of the distance and took his face in both her cold hands, the way she had on the gallery. And this time, she did not let go. I have spent half a year with your grief tied to my own ribs, waking and sleeping, and a man cannot counterfeit that, Corvin. Not even you. So, here is the truth. Out loud, no letter, no silence, no walking away. I do not want to be let go. I want the fool, the man under all of it, the one you only ever showed to me. I have wanted him since the map room and had not the courage to say it plain. Say it again, he breathed. I have to be certain I did not dream it. I love you, you stubborn, silent king. I am done walking away and done being walked away from. And if you ever again leave me a letter in place of your own voice, I will hunt you to the end of the realm and drag you home by the collar. Is that plain enough, or shall I put it in writing? And the king of the Moon Palace laughed, cracked wide open and helpless, and the grief on the far end of the bond broke apart into something so bright it hurt, and he pulled her in and kissed her there in the gray before dawn, on the very ground where all of it had begun, and the bond that had waited half a year snapped open and set, for life, the way the old tales always said it would. They mated before the year turned, and wed after, because she wanted the wolf's vow and the human one both. Half the realm crowded the low road to see it, the young king they had written off, and the marsh-born huntmaster, who had learned to read the man, before the crown ever did. He wept through the vows. The bond told on her before her own first tear fell, and he laughed at her through his. No more silence, he murmured when it was done, his brow against hers. You have my word, out loud every day, until you are sick of the sound of me. See that you keep it, she said. I have grown very good at finding you. There is nowhere you could walk that I could not follow. I know, said Corvin. I am counting on it. She never did open that last letter. Goo. She keeps it sealed, the silver moon unbroken, on the shelf above their bed, beside the small silver token of an oath she once threw at his feet, and he once pinned back to her throat. Why keep a letter she had never read? He asked her once. Because she already knew what it said, she told him, and because she liked the reminder. A letter is what people send when they have run out of braver ways to reach each other, and they never would be again. So, when did he win you over, this quiet, self-sacrificing king? Was it the night he laid the whole truth bare and let her hate him for it, or only at the last on the low water, ready to give her up so she might go free? Or perhaps you are of Nissa's mind, and reckon a man who loved that long in silence owes a great many years of saying it out loud.